will lead to a dead end, no matter how cost-effective. I say appears to be because the way we manage our balance sheets still excludes so many hidden costs. Damage to soils and...
Behind palace walls, a quiet decision has reportedly unfolded with startling speed. King Charles is said to have approved a discreet move that few saw coming, as Prince Andrew is quietly relocated to a remote farm in Norfolk. No fanfare, no statement, just sudden distance and unanswered questions. Courtiers whisper about strategy, timing, and containment while cameras search for clues. So, is this a temporary retreat? A permanent exile? Or a calculated step to steady the monarchy as pressure mounts from every direction tonight across Britain and beyond now? A move made in silence. What began as whispers inside palace corridors has now surfaced as one of the most consequential royal decisions in years. According to insiders close to the monarch, King Charles has personally authorized the discreet relocation of his younger brother, Prince Andrew, to a farm on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk. This was not a routine adjustment, nor a temporary arrangement dressed up as practicality. It was a deliberate move, made with urgency and intent, designed to shut down a growing problem before it spiraled further out of control. The timing is impossible to ignore. The decision was finalized in February 2026, just as renewed scrutiny reignited around Andrew's long-standing and controversial association with the late Jeffrey Epstein. Sources describe the latest revelations as shocking and distressing, reopening wounds the palace had hoped were slowly fading from public focus. For King Charles, the moment demanded action, not statements, not delays, and certainly not another round of internal debate. Those familiar with the process insist this did not come from advisors or committees. This was the king stepping in directly, taking sole responsibility for a situation that had become increasingly volatile. Behind the scenes, the language used was telling. Insiders say the relocation was framed as a way to contain Andrew, a word that speaks volumes about the seriousness of the concern. The monarch is said to believe that every attempt by his brother to exist independently or to remain loosely connected to public royal life only created new risks. Each appearance, each sighting, each moment captured by cameras threatened to reignite public anger and undermine the fragile credibility of the crown. The Norfolk move, by contrast, offered isolation, distance, and control. This decision was also shaped by King Charles's acute awareness of public feeling. He did not need to be shouted at or confronted to understand the mood of the nation. Recent incidents, including Andrew being seen riding near Windsor and smiling at passing cameras, reportedly alarmed the king. To many, those images symbolized a lack of accountability. To Charles, they signaled that the situation could no longer be managed passively. Accelerating Andrew's removal from Royal Lodge and redirecting him to a farm far from public view became, in the king's mind, the only responsible path left. Crucially, this was not framed as punishment in private conversations, but as necessity. The king has reportedly agreed to privately fund Andrew's accommodation and provide a modest stipend for living expenses, underscoring that this was not abandonment. Yet the boundaries were clear. Andrew would no longer operate within the blurred space between royal privilege and public exposure. Norfolk was chosen precisely because it offered separation, both physical and symbolic, from the centers of royal visibility. Those close to the palace say the decision was executed swiftly, almost quietly, because delay itself was seen as dangerous. A plan, the king believed, was meaningless unless enacted without hesitation. And so, without fanfare or public explanation, a line was drawn. What appears on the surface as a simple relocation is, in truth, a decisive intervention that reshapes Andrew's future and signals how far King Charles is willing to go to protect the monarchy, even when it means acting alone. Now, what secret move did King Charles make to reshape Andrew's future? And could this silent decision change the monarchy forever? Stay with us. Out of sight before it was too late. The decision to move Prince Andrew was never simply about where he would live. At its core, it was about visibility, and more importantly, about ending it. King Charles had reached a point where allowing his brother to remain, even loosely, in the public eye was no longer tolerable. Every unexpected appearance, every casual sighting, carried the risk of reopening outrage that the palace could no longer afford to manage. Sources close to the monarch say the aim was clear and uncompromising. Andrew had to disappear from public view, not temporarily, but for good. The moment that crystallized this resolve came in Windsor. Andrew was seen riding through the area, passing camera crews, waving and smiling from his vehicle as if nothing had changed. To onlookers, the gesture appeared tone-deaf. To the palace, it was alarming. Images like that, insiders say, undermined months of careful efforts to distance the monarchy from scandal. They suggested comfort, confidence, even defiance at a time when public patience was already exhausted. For King Charles, it was a stark reminder that informal restrictions were no longer enough. What weighed heavily on the king was his deep understanding of public feeling. He did not need advisors to explain the anger simmering beyond palace gates. He felt it in headlines, in commentary, and in the persistent sense that trust in the institution remained fragile. The monarch, according to those who know his thinking, was acutely aware that the nation's tolerance had limits. Allowing Andrew to continue appearing, even unintentionally, risked pushing those limits beyond repair. This awareness shaped the urgency behind the Norfolk relocation. The move was designed to eliminate chance encounters with cameras, prevent unplanned moments of visibility, and remove Andrew from environments where his presence could trigger fresh controversy. It was not just about shielding Andrew from scrutiny, but about shielding the monarchy from the consequences of his continued exposure. Every wave, every smile, every photograph carried a cost the institution could no longer absorb. The king's approach was rooted in damage control, but also in preservation. Credibility, once lost, is painfully difficult to restore. Palace insiders describe a growing fear that any perception of leniency or indifference would deepen public cynicism toward the crown. By acting decisively, King Charles sought to send a message without words, that he understood the gravity of the situation and was willing to act accordingly. Removing Andrew from public view also served a broader purpose. It allowed the palace to regain control of the narrative, to replace unpredictability with structure. Norfolk, distant from royal hubs and media activity, offered a setting where visibility could be managed tightly and consistently. The goal was not spectacle, but silence. Not explanation, but containment. Behind closed doors, this strategy was seen as essential to the monarchy's survival in a moment of prolonged scrutiny. The king was not reacting to a single incident, but to an accumulation of risks that had been ignored for too long. Allowing those risks to continue unchecked would have invited further damage, not only to his reign, but to the institution he is tasked with protecting, as the consequences of inaction were becoming impossible to deny. And how did the king plan to navigate mounting risks that threatened the monarchy's survival? Will tradition hold or collapse? Stay tuned. From privilege to isolation. With the decision made to remove Prince Andrew from public view, attention quickly turned to where he would go, and the answer revealed just how far his standing had fallen. For years, Andrew had lived at Royal Lodge, a sprawling 30-room mansion in Berkshire that quietly reinforced his identity as a senior royal, even after his dramatic fall from favor. The property was more than a residence. It was a symbol of status, continuity, and privilege, nestled close to Windsor and the heart of royal life. Leaving it behind was not a minor adjustment. It was a rupture. Royal sources indicate that Andrew is now expected to vacate Royal Lodge and relocate to the Sandringham estate in Norfolk, an area traditionally reserved as a private retreat for the monarch rather than a base for sidelined royals. This alone marked a sharp downgrade, but the details made the message even clearer. The intended destination is Marsh Farm, a former farmhouse that bears little resemblance to Andrew's previous surroundings. Where Royal Lodge offered space, grandeur, and long-standing prestige, Marsh Farm offers modesty, separation, and unmistakable restraint. The property itself underscores the scale of change. Marsh Farm is a 5-bedroom former farmhouse, far smaller than anything Andrew has occupied in decades. It sits on swampy land below sea level, a detail that immediately caught the attention of insiders and quietly raised eyebrows within royal circles. This was not an oversight. Sources stress that the property was personally selected by King Charles, reinforcing the sense that this move was deliberate in both substance and symbolism. For Andrew, the contrast could not be more stark. Royal Lodge had long represented his residual place within the institution, even as his public role disappeared. Marsh Farm, by contrast, represents distance from the palace, from visibility, and from the trappings of royal life that once defined him. The setting is quieter, more remote, and far removed from the ceremonial heart of the monarchy. There are no grand halls, no sweeping driveways that speak of rank. Instead, there is isolation, practicality, and control. Those close to the situation emphasize that this relocation is not simply about logistics or convenience. It is a statement. By moving Andrew from a prominent royal residence to a modest farmhouse on the Sandringham estate, King Charles is signaling a clear recalibration of his brother's position. This is not a temporary holding pattern or a hidden luxury disguised as humility. It is a visible, internal acknowledgement that Andrew no longer occupies the space he once did within the royal hierarchy. The choice of Sandringham itself adds another layer. As one of the king's most personal estates, it allows for oversight without exposure. Andrew's presence there can be managed quietly, away from the unpredictable attention that followed him in Windsor. Yet it also places him firmly under the king's authority, reinforcing that this chapter of his life is no longer his to shape independently. To palace watchers, the move reads as a stripping away of senior status without the need for formal declarations. Titles may remain on paper, but proximity to power, prestige, and visibility has been decisively removed. Royal Lodge represented what Andrew used to be. Marsh Farm represents what he has become, a figure relocated, reduced, and reshaped by circumstance as the implications of this downgrade continue to ripple through the monarchy. So what will Andrew's quiet relocation mean for the monarchy? Symbolic exile, or a subtle power shift we're only beginning to see? A quiet property under loud scrutiny. As Prince Andrew's relocation to Marsh Farm moved from planning into reality, the focus shifted sharply from symbolism to practicality, and with it came a new wave of concern inside the palace. What had been selected as a discreet solution quickly became a source of growing anxiety. Marsh Farm, the 5-bedroom former farmhouse on the Sandringham estate, was never designed to house a high-profile royal figure, and insiders began to question whether it could ever be made suitable, no matter how much effort was poured into it. Almost immediately, signs of an extensive security overhaul appeared. Builders and engineers were reportedly seen working on the property, installing secure gates and upgrading advanced alarm systems. Communications infrastructure was also being prepared, an essential requirement for any royal residence, even one meant to remain firmly out of sight. These measures were not cosmetic. They reflected the seriousness with which the palace viewed the risks surrounding Andrew, despite his withdrawal from public life. Yet even with these upgrades underway, doubts persisted. Royal sources quietly questioned whether Marsh Farm could truly meet the security standards expected for someone of Andrew's profile. The location itself raised concerns. Sitting on swampy land below sea level, the farmhouse presented challenges that went beyond appearance. Security experts reportedly worried about access points, visibility, and long-term resilience, issues that are far easier to manage in purpose-built royal properties than in a converted rural farmhouse. Adding to the unease were reports that pest control officers had been spotted at the property. According to the Daily Mail, the visits were linked to claims of a mole problem within the grounds. While such an issue might seem minor in isolation, within the context of a sensitive royal relocation, it became another uncomfortable detail. Among insiders, it fueled a sense of embarrassment and reinforced fears that Marsh Farm was ill-suited for the role it was now being asked to play. These developments sparked intense internal debate. Some questioned whether the king's decision, while firm in intention, might prove difficult to sustain in practice. Others worried about the optics of pouring significant resources into a property that still might not offer adequate protection. The contrast between the effort required to secure Marsh Farm and the relative ease of established royal residences only sharpened the sense that this move was as complicated as it was decisive. At the same time, the issues surrounding Marsh Farm highlighted the broader tension at the heart of the situation. King Charles was determined to keep Andrew out of public view and away from any form of public expense. But doing so privately, without attracting attention or criticism, required a delicate balance. Each security upgrade, each logistical adjustment, risked becoming another story, another point of scrutiny for a monarchy already under pressure. Within palace walls, there was also a quieter concern: perception. The idea that a senior royal, even a disgraced one, might be living in a property plagued by security doubts and pest issues was deeply uncomfortable for some. It raised questions about judgment and planning, even as others argued that discomfort was precisely the point. Marsh Farm was never meant to be glamorous. It was meant to be functional, contained, and discreet. Still, as costs mounted and complications accumulated, whispers grew louder about whether this arrangement could hold. What was intended as a clean solution was beginning to look messy, and the unease surrounding Marsh Farm only added to the sense that the palace was navigating uncharted territory, where every practical problem carried reputational weight. But how will the palace resolve mounting costs and hidden challenges? Can Marsh Farm truly contain the chaos, or is disaster inevitable? Keep watching. A fall felt behind closed doors. As the practical challenges around Marsh Farm continued to mount, attention inevitably turned to how Prince Andrew himself was responding to the reality taking shape around him. According to sources who spoke to the Daily Mail and other outlets, his first encounter with the property was deeply unsettling. Having spent decades surrounded by space, staff, and the quiet privileges of royal life, Andrew was reportedly appalled by what he found. He is said to have described Marsh Farm as pokey, a word that captured both the physical scale of the house and the emotional shock of the downgrade. For a man accustomed to sprawling residences, the 5-bedroom farmhouse represented a stark and uncomfortable shift. Andrew reportedly remarked that he had not lived anywhere that small since leaving his apartment at Buckingham Palace, a comparison that underscored just how far his circumstances had changed. The comment was not simply about square footage. It reflected a bruised sense of identity. Royal Lodge, with its 30 rooms and established grandeur, had long allowed Andrew to maintain a feeling of relevance and status, even as his public role disappeared. Marsh Farm stripped that away in an instant. The discomfort extended beyond the walls of the house. One of the most significant adjustments for Andrew has been the issue of staffing. Unlike his former residences, Marsh Farm does not allow for live-in staff, a limitation that sharply contrasts with the lifestyle he had known for most of his adult life. The absence of constant household support marked another symbolic and practical reduction in privilege. In response, King Charles has reportedly offered a compromise. Andrew may have ad hoc access to staff from Sandringham House when necessary. While this arrangement provides basic assistance, it still represents a dramatic step down from the fully staffed environments Andrew once took for granted. Sources describe Andrew's emotional response as unfolding in stages. Initial outrage gave way to frustration as it became clear that the decision was not open for negotiation. There was no alternative residence waiting in the wings, no quiet reversal behind the scenes. The message from the palace was firm. This was the plan, and it was already in motion. As the days passed, that anger reportedly softened into reluctant acceptance. Andrew, according to one source quoted by The Times, came to understand that resisting the move would only prolong the situation and invite further tension. Eventually, resignation set in. Another insider suggested that while Andrew remained unimpressed by the property and the conditions attached to it, he had begun to accept that this would be his future. The conclusion, as described, was bleak but clear. He must get on with the rest of his life and make the best of what remains. This was not acceptance born of contentment, but of exhaustion and inevitability. The human drama of Andrew's reaction adds a revealing layer to the broader story. It highlights the personal cost of decisions made in the name of institutional survival. Yet it also underscores how far his position has shifted. The anger, the shock, and the eventual resignation all point to a man confronting a reality he can no longer escape. Marsh Farm is not just a new address. It is a boundary, marking the end of one life and the beginning of another, defined by limits, oversight, and a reduced role within a monarchy that is no longer willing to bend. And as Andrew faces boundaries he cannot ignore, will he accept his reduced role or spark a crisis the palace cannot contain? Stay glued. The weight of a crowned brother. As Prince Andrew settled into reluctant acceptance of his new circumstances, the spotlight shifted back to the figure carrying the heaviest burden in this unfolding drama: King Charles himself. Behind the firm decisions and carefully managed distance lies a reluctant caretaker grappling with a problem that has followed him into his reign. Sources close to the palace say the king has agreed to take sole responsibility for his brother, a step that underscores both the gravity of the situation and the absence of any remaining alternatives. Central to this responsibility is Charles's decision to privately fund Andrew's accommodation and provide him with a modest stipend to cover basic living costs. This arrangement is deliberate. It ensures that Andrew is no longer connected to public funds, removing a major source of public anger and criticism. At the same time, it places Andrew firmly under the king's control, cutting off avenues that previously allowed him to act independently. Insiders stress that this was not an act of generosity, but of necessity, shaped by hard lessons learned over years of repeated missteps. According to palace confidants, every effort Andrew made to support himself by independent means ended badly. Whether through ill-judged associations or poorly managed attempts to remain visible, these efforts only deepened the crisis and created fresh complications for the monarchy. One insider summed up the thinking bluntly: each attempt at independence led to greater trouble. Against that backdrop, the idea of containment emerged not as punishment, but as the least damaging option left. As one source put it, containing him is the hope. This containment strategy reveals the deeply personal nature of Charles's dilemma. As king, he is charged with protecting the institution at all costs. As a brother, he is confronting the collapse of a family bond under relentless scrutiny. Those close to him describe a man acutely aware of the human cost of his decisions, yet equally aware that hesitation would only invite further harm. The balance between duty and compassion has rarely been so stark. The king's approach also reflects a sharp understanding of optics. By funding Andrew privately, Charles signals that he recognizes the depth of public feeling and is acting accordingly. He does not need to be heckled to grasp the mood of the nation. The decision to accelerate Andrew's removal from Royal Lodge and relocate him to Norfolk was another nod to that awareness. It demonstrated that the palace is no longer willing to tolerate blurred lines or half measures. At the same time, this arrangement allows Charles to maintain a measure of control that had previously been elusive. With Andrew financially dependent and physically removed from royal centers, the risk of spontaneous appearances or unsanctioned actions is significantly reduced. The king's advisors reportedly view this as a stabilizing move, one that replaces uncertainty with structure. In an era where every image and gesture can ignite backlash, predictability has become a form of protection. Yet the emotional weight of this role should not be underestimated. Taking responsibility for Andrew means accepting that there is no one else to turn to, no committee to absorb blame, and no buffer between family and crown. The king is, in effect, absorbing the consequences of his brother's past while trying to prevent future damage. It is a position marked by frustration, resolve, and an unspoken sense of sadness. This strategy of funding and containment also hints at a broader shift in how King Charles intends to govern. Unlike previous approaches that allowed problems to linger, this one is decisive and inward-facing. The message is clear. The monarchy cannot afford ongoing instability from within. And so, Charles moves forward not with triumph, but with determination, carrying the weight of responsibility in silence as the boundaries around his brother's life tighten, and the cost of maintaining order becomes increasingly personal. And if King Charles' decisive strategy backfires, could the palace face chaos from within? And who will bear the ultimate cost? Strategic moves. In an unsettled palace. Even as the household sought to put a measure of order into the unfolding plans, the atmosphere remained tense, charged with uncertainty that no amount of careful scheduling could erase. Rising costs for security had begun to cast a long shadow over the intended arrangements. Every step forward seemed to bring another calculation, another figure that threatened to tilt budgets and decisions alike. The expenses were not merely numbers on a page. They represented the delicate balance of safety and discretion that the palace demanded. And each misstep risked drawing unwanted attention to the very people they sought to protect. Meanwhile, the property itself continued to pose challenges that no one had fully anticipated. Pest problems, minor at first, had proved stubborn, persistent, and disruptive. The kind of interruptions that could easily be brushed aside in a normal household became matters of operational concern in a royal context, where even small imperfections carried weight and risked public scrutiny. Staff whispered of ongoing issues that resisted solutions, and the pressure to resolve them before any final move was palpable. Complicating matters further, the ongoing dissatisfaction of Prince Andrew loomed over discussions like a cloud that refused to dissipate. His discomfort and disapproval were no longer private grumblings, but factors that had the potential to influence decisions at the highest level. Every adjustment in planning seemed to require a careful negotiation of his stance, and those close to the decision-making process knew that appeasing him entirely was unlikely. His presence or absence loomed over each conversation, injecting tension into what might have otherwise been a straightforward transition. Amid these mounting complications, whispers of a last-minute reconsideration began to circulate. An alternative property on the Sandringham estate emerged as a potential option, a contingency that could shift the entire plan in its final hours. Yet, even this possibility was fraught with uncertainty. Decisions remained pending, each option carrying its own set of risks and logistical hurdles. The palace's silence on the matter only intensified speculation, with officials refusing to comment publicly, leaving observers and insiders alike to read between the lines of every carefully phrased statement. What was meant to be a controlled, deliberate process had grown into a situation that demanded constant recalibration. The plan, while in motion, was far from secure. Every step forward was shadowed by unresolved questions, and every decision risked reopening debates that had seemed settled. The palace's carefully maintained equilibrium now appeared fragile, its stability contingent on variables that remained only partially addressed. Within these walls, the sense of an ongoing royal crisis persisted, one that had yet to reach its conclusion and promised to keep even the most experienced advisors vigilant, wary, and, above all, uncertain. So, what do you think could tip the palace's fragile plans into chaos? Will they stick to the original plan or pivot at the last moment? We'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.